show. Yes, can you see it? I think so, huh?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for this great opportunity to present our research. It's really an honor. So my name is Milena Dinkova, and I'm a researcher at CPB Netherlands. That's the Bureau for Economic Policy Analysis. So amongst others, we also do policy relevant research. And I will present shortly an article on cyber incidents and security measures and financial returns of Dutch firms. And this is joint work with my colleagues Rami Elderdiri and Bastiaan Overvest. And I believe they're also in the audience. Yeah, so you know, those pictograms, they pretty much summarize the topic of our paper. Okay, so to start with, let me say I'm going to be pretty brief on the motivation. So I won't discuss any literature. You can read that in a paper, but I wanted to show you later on some graphs and some research results. So I want to have more time for that. So I'm an economist, and one of the most interesting questions, and when we think about cybersecurity and firms, is whether firms under or over invest in cybersecurity. And hence, that gave us the motivation to do an empirical study on the relationship between incidents, investments in cybersecurity, and the financial results of a firm. So we conducted two analyses. The first one linked incidents and the investment in cybersecurity, which we proxied by looking at taking different security measures. And the second analysis links the investment of cybersecurity on the financial results of a firm. And our contribution is that we have very rich data. I'm going to talk about that in a bit. And that the data is representative of the Dutch firm population. So it also includes very small, micro and small firms. So let me delve into the data and the method. So we use two data sources. The first one is an ICT use survey from Statistics Netherlands. That is the Dutch Statistical Office. And it is a representative annual survey of about 14,000 companies. And it's representative of the Dutch firm population. And it has a lot of data, a lot of variables. And so the main variables that we're interested in was it has detailed data on cyber incidents, so the types also of cyber incidents, for example, not only attacks, but also, for example, data breach, etc. So 6 types of incidents, and then also details on security policy measures. And then next to that, we also have details on ICT characteristics or the ICT infrastructure of firms. Meaning that whether, for instance, employees get training or not, or a specific software that firms use. And then our second data source is administrative data, also from Statistics Netherlands, and it's tax records of non-financial organizations. So mind you that our analysis does not include financial institutions. And it has financial records also on from 2014-16, and it has data on revenue, net income, for instance. And let me briefly talk about the methodology here. So we use a methodology that is, well, typical for economists, you could say. So our main independent variable is the security level index, which tries to proxy the investment in cybersecurity of firms. We divide it into 4 levels. You'll see more of it later in the graphs. So the higher the security level index, the more firms invest in cybersecurity. And then we have 2 outcome variables that correspond to also what I said at the very beginning of my talk. The first one, when we try to estimate the probability of reporting a cybersecurity incident. And the second outcome variable is that we look at profitability. which is net income divided by net revenue. And to answer, well, those two, or to conduct those two analyses, we use regression analysis, ordinary least squared. And we also conducted various robustness checks, for instance, also looking at nonlinear models and also looking at other ways to measure the investments of cybersecurity. Okay, so this is, I believe, the more interesting part of the talk. So here we see a graph, the frequency distribution of security levels per firm size. So we grouped the firms in 4 firm sizes, ranging from micro to large. And as you can see, you also have 4 security levels, what I was talking about before. And what you see is that larger firms have higher security levels. So the larger firms have a higher share of what they invest more. They've taken more security measures, and that's reflected also in a higher security level. And small firms, so micro and small firms, who are the majority also of the sample, they tend to invest less. So they take none or less or little security measures. Another interesting statistic or figure to show you is that if we look at the percentage of companies that report incidents, and here we split it also for a company size, for the 4 company sizes, and what we can see here is that larger firms report cyber incidents more frequently. So this figure and the last figure, they sound probably very intuitive to you. And we thought, well, how to make sense of both figures together. And for that reason, we used regression analysis, where we estimated the probability of reporting incidents. And what we find is that the probability of reporting incidents is inverse U-shaped across security levels. So what does it mean? It means that it first increases the estimated probability and then it decreases in security levels. And also good to know is that we correct for different risk factors. So that's what makes this table you see different from the figures you've seen before. We still show you correlations, by the way. So we don't claim any causality, but now we correct for other confounding factors. And what you see here are also relative probabilities in percentage points. And so that's why you don't see 4 coefficients, but just 3. So we excluded one group and as a reference category. All right. And now we turn to the second set of results. This is then, now we talk about profitability. So financial performance of a firm, and we chose to use profitability as a measure because it also measures the effectiveness. It's an efficiency measure of firm performance. And well, I really like this graph. So that's a violent plot, and the dots are means. And so you see 4 plots per security level. And what you can see is that there's not really a difference in profitability across security levels. And I should say here that the profitability that we Winsorized it, that we already corrected for outliers. And also, when we included, for instance, firm size and software type, training, innovation, so whether a firm engages in innovation or not, and other and sector characteristics, then we can corroborate what we just found. So what I just showed you, that still there are no differences in profitability. Okay, so to conclude, I think I'm doing good on time. So what we saw is, firstly, the probability of reporting an incident first increases and then decreases in security levels. And that actually, it sounds also quite intuitive, because you can say the more the more security measures you take, also the more aware you become of cyber risks. So then when you're already very mature, you can say, then also it is then you're also more able to detect security measures. And the second set of results is that we don't have empirical evidence for the relation between taking security measures and financial results for Dutch firms. And also our results are robust to various checks. And of course, there's a lot of room for further research. So there are two issues I want to present to you. One is we use survey data. So the incidence, the probability of reporting an incident is actually, well, it's all measured. Security measures are self-reported. And so that is dependent on whether a firm actually is aware of that a cyber incident has happened. So what we actually really would have loved to have is to have access of data for instance, mitigated incidents, so that we also know, okay, so there was a DDoS attack happening. First, has it been mitigated or not? And then also, what does the firm say about it? So does it report it as that it happened? So that is something that would allow us then to measure better the effectiveness of security measures. And the other one, as I already mentioned, is that we are talking about correlations. So we don't, well, we were not looking for a causal estimate with our analysis actually, but if you are interested in causality, then you should use data, longitudinal data, with a panel structure where you follow firms for many years and you follow their financial records, which is no problem because Statistics Netherlands has that data. But I'm talking more about the survey, that then it's important that, for instance, for 10 or 15 years, you can follow a firm and you don't really change also the questions you ask to the firm. And then that enables you then to use more tools and to identify a causal effect. So that was it in a nutshell. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Milena, for the presentation. So maybe I can read some of the, let's say, clarification question from the chat.
Yeah, sure.
The chat has disappeared. Just 1 second. Okay, so the first question from a methodological point of view was, how did you define the security levels?
Yes, yeah, good question. When giving a presentation, I also doubted how much should I say about it. So in the survey, there were 11 security measures that were measured. So I included it also in the appendix of the slides. Maybe I can make them available if you like. But for instance, some security measures were in encryption, or whether the firm uses safe passwords, risk analysis, etc. And then we looked at which measures are basic and which are more sophisticated. And then we ranked the security measures, and based on that, we defined 4 security levels. And actually, we first, in the paper, actually, we called it a maturity index, but we realized maybe actually a security index sounds better.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. Another question that came immediately at the beginning of your presentation: why did you exclude financial organizations?
Oh, yes, that is due to data availability. So Statistics Netherlands, they have a separate data set on non-financial organizations and one on financial organizations. And we were also, so we could also include, you then use a different data set, you can merge it. So it's more, a technical issue. It's
Okay, maybe a last clarification question. I mean, the other questions are good as well, but we're going to keep them for the discussion after. There was a question about what was the definition of an incident in your survey. How
Yes.
did you define it for the respondents?
Yes, so there were 6 types of incidents. So there were 6 questions on an incident, and one was so one incident was, for example, whether there was a data breach and whether that data breach was due to internal, so whether something has been leaked, or whether it was due to a hacker, for instance, who got data. And another one was also whether data has been destructed or mutilated. And another type of incident was also system failure. And then system failure due to an attack or due to technical issues. And actually, system failure was one of the most frequent cyber incidents reported. So in our analysis, we also took account of that, and we also estimated models for each type of incident separately.
Okay, thank you very much, Milena, for the clarification. We keep all the other questions for the, let's say, this discussion at the end of the presentation. Taha, are you ready for your presentation? You're still muted. I don't know if you can unmute yourself or if we need, yes, you're unmuted.
No, it works. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, so the next paper is Can Insider Trades Reliability Predict Cybersecurity Hazards in Public Firms? And Taha is going to respond it in the answer that question in the next minute. So Taha, the floor is yours. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, perfect. So hi, everyone. My name is Taha Habakor. I'm an assistant professor of MIS at Temple University, joining you from usually sunny Philadelphia, which is not so funny today. Thanks to the organizers to have us, give us a platform to present here. So I'm excited to share it with you and looking forward to see your comments and questions and suggestions. It's a work in progress, so we really appreciate it. All right, let me also laser pointer. All right, so what's the background to this question about insider trading? Before I do that, let me give you a preface about legality of insider trading in the United States, recognizing that this is a diverse audience and laws in the United States regarding insider trading are very particular. So there are certain types of insider trading that are illegal that we have heard all about, and usually insider trading is illegal if an executive trades firm securities with material information withheld from the public. What is that material information? Is something that is tangible, relates to performance of the firm, performance securities, and is not shared. Because of the agency motivations, the executive acts on it and either buys or sells and makes a profit based off of that. That's illegal insider trading. There's a type of legal insider trading, and there's a reason that it's legal, and I explained that. And legal insider trading happens if executives wanted to make a trade on a hunch, or basically are compensated through securities of having the securities of the firm. Is usually happening through selling those securities as part of their compensation. So the first step that I told you, that is trading based on a hunch, that they have a reason to believe that the firm is not doing well, but the financials are not showing it, or that there's an imminent threat that they feel that is coming their way, but it's not material or it's not legally material to be shared, so they're fine doing the insider trading. Now, the reason that we have legality over that is that the argument over the legislation by the SEC and other proponents of this legal matter is that it's a very good signal to the markets about what is going on, underlying risk, underlying advantages of the firm have in terms of, depending on whether it's a purchase or sales. Now, why we are looking at this insider trading and cybersecurity? A reason is that there's an increase in cybersecurity incidents, and increasingly markets, financial markets, are on alert. So investors are caring about it, and this information asymmetries are basically exacerbating the information asymmetries that exist between the firm executives and the investors and analysts alike. So the real question is that what are the transparency tools that we have so that we could understand, investors and these analysts could understand whether there's an underlying threat, there's an underlying risk, that which means that there's an imminent threat. There's that. There's also the possibility that there has been a breach that has not been disclosed yet, and also investors and analysts have obviously motivated to know about that. Now, the U.S. Security and Exchange Commission (SEC) has two tools for disclosure of that. One tool is public reports, annual reports, 10Qs, 10Ks. And through that, firms are expected, if there's a material risk, they're expected to disclose that. There's also indirect signals through Forms 3 and 5, which are for disclosure of insider trading. They're not traditionally viewed as means of transparency tools for cybersecurity risk. But our intention is that if executives have the incentive to trade, and then we could show some systematic relation to actual threats, then that would be a transparency tool. So that's what we are trying to understand. Now let's try to understand what is it with the 10Qs, which is the quarterly forms, and of course 10Ks also are annual. Our data is basically based on the 10Qs. So these tools are usually becoming boilerplates, and SEC recognizes that in a sense that they become repetitive. Usually there is no new information coming out in each quarter or in each year. There are minor tweaks to the language. So the question is that when they are disclosing cyber risk, is it really risk that is informative to the investors, or something that they are doing because they have a duty and obligation to disclose certain risk? Of course, some of the preventive cybersecurity investments that they are disclosing and internal audits that they are disclosing might not be sufficient for the investors to decide whether there's an underlying threat to the firm or not. But more also, SEC itself incentivizes not disclosing by saying that laws do not require disclosure itself if it would compromise a register in cybersecurity. So if the firm can argue in a court that I felt that if I disclose this particular threat, it would be, it would have a snowball effect and it was more threatening to me, then they have a reason not to disclose, right? Legally. Now, the insider trading side of it, though, it's interesting. We already have in finance and accounting evidence that insider trading and one of our investors and executives have asymmetries. They're doing insider trading, legal insider trading. And there is evidence regarding firms' financial risks, that whenever there's a financial risk to a firm, executives are doing those tradings, insider trading and in terms of selling the shares is a signal of firms' heightened risk. So these are the things that are established in the finance. Although as the presenters in the firm first session were talking about systematic risk, there's a question of whether this financial risk is separate from cybersecurity risk, where traditionally they're not viewed as the same, although there's evidence that the two are converging, right? So the question that we are asking is cybersecurity really an indicator of a future imminent, cybersecurity hazard? There's anecdotal evidence about it, and this particular one was illegal and ended with the arrest of Equifax's CIO, where the breach had happened. The Equifax's breach had happened, which was a huge breach. Over 100 million records were compromised, and these executives basically went ahead, did not disclose it, sell their shares, and then subsequently were arrested because there were email exchanges that were showing that they were contemplating that. The CIO was basically, if you look at the text of the news over here, is from the Department of Justice of the state of Georgia. He was actually searching on, this is the email that he sends. Oh, sounds bad. We may be the one that is breached, and then he went away and conducted web searches on the impact of, Experience 2015 data breach on the stock price. So he basically wanted to see how big it is, and he went ahead and sold his stock options. So obviously what we are asking is there an association between insider trading in this quarter and the hazard of cybersecurity in an upcoming one? And more importantly, can the two tools be informative to one another. So when insider trading happening, is it going to be more informative, increasing the informativeness of the disclosures in the 10Qs? So we're looking at firm quarter observations belonging to around 2,000 firms. We are excluding firms that are financial banking and insurance because the laws for insider trading for them are different. And the year span that we are covering is 2011 to 2017. We are in terms of the actual security breaches, we look at the clearinghouse. We're looking at the security breaches that are important or not self-contained and are usually reflected in news. So we are going through LexisNexis to make sure that these are cybersecurity breaches that are big enough, important enough. We have two main measures that we are focusing on. Each of them is a proxy for informativeness or tool for transparency. The first transparency is report informativeness, which is measured by number of sentences in 10Q with firm-specific information disclosed, cybersecurity disclosure of SEC filings. Abnormal trading is number of shares that they are trading, number of shares that they're selling, basically. It's a sales ratio adjusted for the 2-year average of it. So the abnormal trading that executives of the firm are doing in a certain quarter is what we are focusing on. We're looking at a bunch of controls, including the industry level breach happening, the investment emphasis coming from data, CI database, looking at the extent to which there are 14 categories of cybersecurity systems and software. So we are getting a ratio of to what extent they are investing in the software in each of the firms. Of course, the size of the firm, in terms of assets and employees, and how much innovative the firm is. What we are estimating is a Cox proportional hazard model. So the exit condition is either until the end of the study or the next observation, or if a security breach is happening. We're interested in beta, and we're interested in the coefficient of abnormal trading, and also we are looking at the interaction of the two. Remember, we wanted to understand whether insider trading itself can increase informativeness of the reports. Because even though our model is very associative, we are not having any causal claims, but there is selection happening into the levels of reportance and informativeness and abnormal trading. So we have a control function, and we have a bunch of exclusion restrictions for the first stages for both estimating report informativeness and AT. There's particular control function that we are using is Garens 1984 that allows for modeling variables that are continuous or not 0 and 1. This is the main model, the main findings that we have. As you can see, report informativeness from the 10 case is not producing any significance indication regarding to hazard of security breaches. Although whenever sales of shares are happening, they're significantly related, almost 12% more likely that a breach is happening in the next quarter. And of course, the abnormal trading, we are finding that it's increasing the marginal effect of report informativeness. So while 10K reports on themselves are not that much interpretable, when they are accompanied by when they are accompanied by sales of the shares, we are seeing that the impact on predicting likelihood of a hazard increases. We did a bunch of different robustness tests, including one interesting thing was that we just looked at, in these reports, because they are boilerplate, what if there are some word changes, right? Some meaningless word changes. Do they indicate anything? And in cases of industry, we could see that, Equifax, for instance, went ahead and changed their wording, not to the effect that explaining what the breach was in the quarter that they knew breach had happened, but they were, tweaking it, saying from, we are responsible to the risk, to saying that, it happens to everyone, it happens in the industry. So we were measuring the number of words changing, and our measure of RI was that. You'll remember that we are also removing the fixed effects of firms, and we were also seeing that there is a marginal effect increase whenever abnormal trading happening and those words are changing. So it's hopefully informative to the investors. We also looked at an event study. We were thinking, insider trades are not earmarked, so we were looking at major cybersecurity incidents happening to a firm's rival. And then in a window of 7 days, we were measuring abnormal trading for the particular firm, and we could have, it reduces our observations to around 1,200. And And we were looking at, this is a restricted sample model, you could see that abnormal trading in that week after the threat significantly increased, almost 20% likelihood if they're making a trade in that one week, significant increase in the marginal effect of report informativeness also whenever abnormal trading is happening. We did a bunch of, analysis heterogeneity in terms of, so we were looking at analyst coverage. Whenever analyst coverage is high, information asymmetries are low. So we are seeing that the impact of abnormal trading reduces in the cases that analyst coverage is high, which is basically indicator of the mechanism, associative mechanism that we are explaining. Also, you can see that as the tenure of executives increases, as they are more experienced, their abnormal trading is more informative. This is a positive and significant interaction between abnormal trading and tenure on log likelihood of it. And so basically in terms of implication.
We're gonna have to wrap up at this stage. So if you could close. Sure. No, go ahead. You can wrap up in a minute. That's fine.
Yeah. So just, I mean, that was my last slide. So in terms of implications, what we are saying is that SSD regulations are fragments, usually are not considered together. This is an indication that investors and analysts alike can start looking at Forms 3 and 5 in conjunction in 10Q, especially as they try to understand the underlying risk as it relates to the cybersecurity in firms.
Okay, thank you very much, Tara, for your presentation. We're going to take just 1 minute for a clarification question. So about your, the motivation of your work, there was a question in the chat asking whether there were, let's say, any record of SEC filling regarding the Spectre and Meltdown Intel's issues. So could you comment on that? Do you have any idea? You're muted. Yes. Richard, could you unmute Tara for a second?
Yeah. What was the question again, Kevin?
So one of the big security, let's say, issue of the last year was Spectre and Meltdown for Intel processors. And the question is whether you're aware of any record of SEC filling related to Spectre and Meltdown.
No, I actually don't have information about that, but I would be, I mean, that in our research is still at infancy stages. No, I would be lying if I say I have.
Okay, we're gonna keep the other question for the final discussion. We're gonna move on with the next presentation. So, Human, you're ready for the presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, so our next and last presentation for this session is gonna be provider output and downstream firms service tier choice, presented by Uman. So, Uman, the floor is yours. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. So can you see my screen and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay. So thank you very much. My name is Human. I'm an assistant professor of business technology management at the University of Calgary. I'm very excited to present my work here. This is a joint work with Lisa Yo from University of California, Merced. So this is very much a working paper. We already had a lot of good comments from the reviewers at WEIS, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and comments further. And I believe this is the first theory paper as well. So let's see how this goes. Okay, so you see a lot of different information and communications technology providers in a lot of different contexts. So cloud computing storage is probably the biggest one, but there are a lot of enterprise level applications and software as a service, all of those kinds of applications, as well as in the context of cybersecurity, you have managed security service providers, or MSSPs. And in a lot of these cases, you have a menu of offered service features and qualities that firms have to choose from. So over here, I have Dropbox, I have Google Cloud, and IBM MSSP. So basically, you can usually mix and match and find the product that is best suited to your needs. Okay? So if you're kind of interested in the impact of this menu on how firms choose their service tiers and how that impacts the security quality that users get in the downstream. So what we mean by provider output is basically this the quality of the menu that is provided to the firms. Right? So if a provider puts in some effort into efficiencies and let's say R&D, they can improve the menu that they offer to the firms. We refer to that as output. And here are some examples again from G Suite. So from 18 to 2020, they added a bunch of features, including some around security, identity protection, and things like that. So again, this is kind of what they call additions. We refer to these as tiers. And again, we are interested in seeing what is the impact of this menu on the service tier that the firms choose. So if a firm has a better security, that probably improves their demand. So that's kind of a general assumption that we have. And the trade-off that they're doing when choosing a service tier is that they're trading off better quality to higher cost, right? So you have to pay more for higher quality. Let's look at an example here. So let's say this is the service quality that the end customers, the firm's customers, perceive. And let's say the provider's output is over here. So they're giving you a list of items or service tiers that you can kind of choose from as a firm. And let's say the firm is kind of choosing the higher end of the tiers that are offered by the provider. So we want to kind of see what is the impact of changing providers menu or output on what the firms choose. So let's say if the provider has better quality, would the firm again choose a higher tier, or perhaps they would kind of choose somewhere in the middle? And this is the quality that the end customers will perceive, right? So based on that, we have a few research questions. Firstly, we want to see what's the impact of provider output or this menu of services on downstream firms' chosen service tier, as well as their demand and profit. Specifically, what we were interested in, or what we were kind of motivated by, was we wanted to see if there's a case where, for example, let's say Google improves its output. They give you a better menu, but that's actually detrimental to the downstream firms. And secondly, on a higher level, we wanted to see if there's a case where the incentives of the provider and the firm are misaligned. So let's say the provider does not have an incentive to give you a better menu, and that might actually be bad for the firms. Okay. So I'll just jump into the model. As I said, this is a theoretical work. We have very general assumptions about demand. I won't go through them here. You can find them in the paper, and we will update the paper hopefully after the conference to kind of match what I'm presenting here. But we have very general assumptions about demand. We don't consider any kind of special form in our functions. So it's very general. We have a monopolist provider, which is offering a menu of services, and then two firms in a duopoly are choosing their service tiers, and they're kind of investing in, let's say, cybersecurity. And they're choosing from the provider's menu. We assume fixed prices at the firm level, so that's a core competition on quality. We consider provider output sensitivity of demand, so how changing provider output impacts demand. We consider service tier sensitivity of demand, so how a firm's chosen service tier in terms of cybersecurity impacts their demand. And most importantly, we consider some externalities. So each firm's quality can have an externality on the other firm. It can either be zero, it can be positive, which might be the case in complementary products. So one firm's quality has a positive spillover on the other firm. And then if you have competition, then you'll have negative externalities. So we consider all of these situations to see how the chosen service tier demand and profits are impacted. Okay. So the analysis is, again, the provider has a continuous set of service tiers based on their output. Their profit is basically the demand coming from the firms. times the investment in cybersecurity, so the tier that they're choosing, minus the cost of that output, so R&D efforts, so on. Firms choose the service tier that maximizes their profit. So again, we have a general demand function times the margins, which is the fixed price minus the service tier investment that they choose. And this is a two-stage game. In the first stage, provider sets its output level and firms choose their service tier in the second stage. And again, we use backwards induction to solve for the equilibrium. Okay, so I'll just go quickly through the results. First, we were interested to see what's the impact of output on firms' chosen service tier. And we find expectedly that if the service provider improves its menu, so let's say they give you a better quality service at the same cost, then firms reduce their chosen service tier. So they will go with a lower service tier. And the reason for this is that they kind of have a overall quality in mind. And if the menu improves, they kind of go lower in the menu, and that improves their margins. Second, we look at the impact on demand, and this one is not so straightforward. So we find that actually, even whereas in case of low externality, the optimal demand increases. If externality is high, meaning that you have perhaps complementary products for the firms, then you can have a case where optimal firm demand decreases. And that kind of points to the willingness to pay of customers, meaning that customers are actually receiving a product that is of lower security level or quality. So that was kind of interesting. This shows that it's possible that if the upstream menu of services improves, that the customer's perceived quality would actually decrease. And if we put these together, we can look at the profit, because profit is basically demand times margins, which is calculated based on service tier. And unsurprisingly, based on these, we find that, again, if externality is either negative or positive but small, meaning that you have weak strategic complements, you have this case where firm profit increases with that menu increasing. However, if externality is positively large, meaning that you have strong strategic complements, then you have this case where actually when the MSSP improves its menu, the firms are negatively impacted. So this kind of answers our first question. And then going to stage one, we look at what the provider chooses. So would they actually have an incentive to improve their output? And again, because the provider's profit is basically the demand coming from the firms, we find that the provider does not have an incentive to improve output if externality is large. Again, if you have complementary products. However, if externality is really low, you may have this case where the provider actually puts in some effort and improves its menu or its output. So to kind of put this all together, we look at the impact of output on provider profit, firm profit, and customers. And based on what the externality between the two firms are, you will have these different regions. So if externality is really low, possibly it's negative, meaning that there's competition. The provider has some incentive to improve its output, and that's actually beneficial for both firms and the customers. So everything is good in this region. However, if you go to moderately low levels of externality, so you still have some competition, but the competition is not that much, the provider actually does not have an incentive to improve its output, and that suppression of output or their menu is actually bad for firms and customers. So this kind of may call for maybe an argument for doing some sort of regulatory mechanism to nudge the provider to improve its output, because that will give higher security and higher quality to both firms and the customers. And then if we increase, if you have a case where externality is kind of moderately high, a little bit of complementarity, but not much, then again, the provider does not have an incentive to improve its output, but that is okay for the customers, but not so much for the firms. And then finally, if externality is high, so complementary products, the provider does not have an incentive to improve its output. And that's actually beneficial to both firms and the customers, because over here, if the output improves, the firms kind of underinvest in security, and that causes harm to users as well. Okay, so that's, yeah, so this is my last slide. So in conclusion, we show that provider output can either be beneficial or detrimental to firms. In terms of a regulatory aspect, if externality is moderately low, the provider and firms have misaligned incentives in terms of output. So the provider does not want to improve its output, and that's actually bad for both firms and customers. Okay, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you, Roman, for the presentation. So we're going to skip directly, I think, to the discussion, where we're going to have a mix of questions for the three of you. So maybe we could start with a question from Stephen Bonner for Milena for the first presentation. Stephen, would you like to ask your question yourself? I think Richard maybe could unmute you. Yes, Stephen, you're unmuted, so go ahead if you want.
Forgive me, I've lost track of what my question was back then.
Okay. So you were saying that it was interesting that incidents went up with investment, and this sounds like an example of uncanny valley in security. So maybe you want to elaborate on that, and then Milena can answer to your question if you want.
Yeah, the ex-Goldman CISO is just joining Google, published some interesting thoughts about this, that we have many of these areas where initial improvements make things look worse, but are actually better, and this can put people off. And it seemed like this was another example of that. So it wasn't really a question, sorry.
Okay, anyway, that's fine. Let's move, sorry, I just need a second. Jeff Hall, you had a question as well. Would you like to ask it yourself, or otherwise I can do it? You should be unmuted now. Let me see. Okay, not yet. So maybe I can read it. So Jeff was saying the smaller firms likely do not know if they have had an incident unless it impacts their operation. So there's the whole question of how do you, do you even detect those incidents? So he was saying it's probably part of the reason for the lower incident reporting. So Milena, could you comment on that?
Yeah, that was actually what I was also trying to say during the presentation, that's why we weren't really surprised that we initially saw that small firms report less incidents, that the main reason for that could be just that they don't see it indeed. And then the more security measures they take, and the more, well, maybe sophisticated they get, the more likely they are also that they actually see the accidents. So that's why I also would have loved to have data or machine data on real accidents, and that we can actually say something about that, also about the perception. That would have been very nice.
Okay, thank you for your answer. We had another question from Craig Heth. I don't know if he's unmuted and willing to ask it himself.
Well, mine wasn't really a question either. It was an observation that although the sentiment that...
sorry, I forgot to mention, this is for Tara. Sorry.
Yes.
And now you can relax. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Craig.
Yes, I appreciate the sentiment that cybersecurity is becoming an increasing concern, but I think it was the specific point about business-ending events I was disputing. And actually, there was a little bit further contribution in the chat, which pointed to a crowdsourced list of actually 22 companies over, I think this time scale is a little over 10 years. So we're looking at only a handful of companies each year. So yeah, it's not crucial to the paper, but I just thought it was worth pointing out, and you might want to check that reference.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Craig. And I guess the broader, and I agree with you that there might be, there are a couple of things. So it's as it relates to the cash flow danger to the investors, that's basically the question that drives their interest in knowing the underlying risk. As it relates to the business ending, there is not a lot of, failing companies for systematic reasons, you know, and notwithstanding, you know, economic downturns, you know, mergers and acquisitions and everything. So there is the sentiment of threat is there, whether the actual number is big or not. I absolutely agree with you.
Okay, we had another question about from Philippe Dossé. Do you want to, Philippe? I see you are unmuted. Do you want to ask it yourself? For Tara as well. Okay,
so
so
I think the question is about the bear rates. I mean,
yes,
that's actually a very good question. And no, we don't. And to be honest, I'd not thought about it, but it's very relevant. So I don't know whether it gets weaponized in that way. There are bear rates, targeted bear rates to, you know, devalue a company with regards to cybersecurity. But no, to be honest, we have not looked at it.
okay, do we have any other question for the speakers? We still have some time, otherwise I can maybe give another. Right. There was also a question for you, Milena, from Fernando Montenegro. I'm going to read the question. In meantime, Fernando, if you want to speak and add some clarification, please feel free to do it. If Richard can unmute you. So Fernando asked, did you capture the respondent role? Essentially, the fact that a senior manager may be less familiar with technical controls than a technical staff member. So did you take into account the role of the respondent in your analysis of their the answers they provided?
That is an excellent question. And in fact, actually, we did not even know what the role of the respondent was. So we just know that Statistics Netherlands have one contact person per company. So it's anonymized data. So we don't even know what company it is actually. And so we don't know anything about the role. Also, whether it's a CFO or whether it's the CTO. So we don't know. And so we could not take that into account. And that might be also a reason why it obscures the self-reported data on and taking the measures, and maybe also on incidents a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you, Milena, for the clarification. Fernando seems happy with your clarification as well. So, Human, there's no explicit question for you, but there was a suggestion in the chat from Russell Thomas. Maybe you would like to elaborate on this after, but essentially the suggestion was about the term provider output that you used, and he was suggesting cloud service tiers and even cloud service or cloud vendor instead of provider. So, I mean, can you comment on that, or maybe defend the terminology that you use in the paper?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. We actually have gone back and forth a lot between different terms for this. I think output kind of comes from the stream of literature on how like it's not just the service tier. It can be a lot of different things. But I think that's a good comment. Like within this context, it might make more sense to talk about it as cloud providers. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Human, for your answer. I think I remember from one question that was in the chat, but I don't remember who asked it, but it was from Milena as well. So the question was about the firms that rely on cloud service provider, where like essentially security is split between the original company and the cloud service provider. So in that case, how did you classify the incidents? To who did you assign them essentially? I don't remember whose question was that, but can you elaborate on this maybe?
So you mean, just to make sure I understand the question, because some firms outsource their cybersecurity to other firms, whether we could correct for that in our data? Is that maybe what it means, or?
It was more like the key. Okay, if I can read you the question, it was Dan asked, if firms use the cloud, how do you measure security under a shared security model? So it's not that they outsource the security, it's like they outsource part of this business in the cloud. So to whom do you attribute the incident essentially?
Actually, we did not take that into account, but now you say it, that would be still another check we could do in the data, because we do know indeed whether a firm uses the cloud or not, and then we could use that subsample. Yeah, that is still something we should do. Thank you. So we did not take that into account yet.
Okay. Thanks. We still have time maybe for one or two other questions. I don't see anything in the chat now. Sorry if I missed one of your questions. Feel free to ask it again in the chat, and I will.
Kevin, I guess there was a question about whether there was any other event other than a cybersecurity breach to a rival that instigated more trading. One event that we observed, I guess Brian was asking that question.
Mm-hmm.
One event that we observed is not as equally as strong in instigating trading with regards to, and then connecting it to cybersecurity. For bigger firms, when their rivals were struggling with what, for lack of better terms, we say social responsibility incident, in terms of, if there's an online campaign against a company, usually the executives, we saw a spike in trading of executives of rival firm. We had a theory about it that it might have to do with the general sentiment and vigilante attacks that could happen to those larger firms as a result of the rivals being a target of a campaign. But again, we decided not to use that as an instrument because we were not really sure whether it's just happened to be a correlation or it's instigating trades regarding cybersecurity audits.
Thank you, Tara, for the clarification. Well, I guess we're done. I don't see any other questions, so we're going to indulge in the next break. From what I've seen, the random assignment will be different for this break. So thanks again for your question, and see you soon.